The cry came out of the storm before the woman did. Cole Bannister had his hat brim pulled low, and the gelding's head turned against the rain when he heard it, thin and high and broken under the thunder, a sound a man's body knows before his mind has named it. He pulled up hard. The Texas sky had gone the color of a bruise an hour before sundown, and the rain came sideways across the flats, so he could not see the source of it, only follow it, the gelding fighting him the whole way toward the one thing every animal is built to run from. He found her in the lee of an overturned wagon, in the mud, alone. And she was not crying out from fear. She was bringing a child into the world by herself in the middle of a Texas thunderstorm, and there was no one within 4 miles to help her but a cowboy who had never in his life done a single thing he was about to do. If you have ever come upon a thing that gave you no time to decide whether you were equal to it, you already know what was in Cole Bannister's chest in that moment. And if you want to see how this night ends, subscribe to this channel and stay with me to the very last word. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. Because what this cowboy did next, and what he did the morning after, and what he did in front of the whole town of Ridgely 3 weeks later, would be talked about in that county for 50 years. Now let us go back to the overturned wagon in the rain, where a stranger is kneeling down in the mud beside a woman he has never met, and neither of them yet knows the other's name. Her name was Hannah Reese, and she would tell him that later, much later, after the worst of it was over. In the storm she could not have told him her own name if her life depended on it, and for a while there it looked as though it might. Cole did what the rain and the dark and the woman's body told him to do, which was the only instruction available to him. And he was not a man given to prayer, but he prayed that night the way men pray who have run clean out of anything else, without words, with his whole shaking attention bent on the work of his hands. The child came near midnight. A boy. He came out blue and silent, and Cole's heart stopped with him. And then the cowboy did the one thing he had seen done once, years back, to a near-drowned calf, turned the small body and cleared its mouth and rubbed at it rough and desperate. And the boy hauled in a breath and screamed. And the scream was the finest sound Cole Bannister had heard in the whole of his life. He got them under the wagon bed and built what fire he could from the dry underside of the boards, and he gave the woman his coat and then his shirt, and he held the squalling child against his own bare chest under the coat to keep it warm, because there was nothing else left to keep it warm with. And that is how the 3 of them passed the night, a cowboy, a stranger, and an hour-old boy, while the storm spent itself and moved off east, and the stars came out hard and cold over the drowned flats. By the gray of morning he had a name for her, and the bones of a story. She had been 4 months a widow, and 7 months gone with child when the trouble started, and the trouble had a shape he recognized before she finished telling it. Her husband had died of a horse fall in the winter. The land they'd proved up on, good bottom land, with water, had a man who wanted it, a cattleman named Garrett, who held most of Ridgely in one fist and the bank in the other. With her husband cold in the ground, Garrett had pressed her, first with offers and then with the kind of offers that are threats wearing a smile, and when she would not sell, things began to happen. Her fences came down in the night. Her well was fouled. And finally a paper had appeared, signed in her dead husband's hand or a good imitation of it, that put her land up against a debt no one had ever heard him owe. And the law in Ridgely was Garrett's law, and would not look at it twice. She had loaded what she could into the wagon and started for her sister's place in the next county, rather than birth her child under that man's growing shadow, and the storm had caught her on the flats, and the rest he had seen for himself. Hannah Reese was not a small woman. She had never been a small woman, and she said so plainly that first morning, the way a person lays a card on the table to get it out of the way, said that she knew what Ridgely thought of her, that she'd heard every word the town had to spend on a big woman alone, that she'd stopped some while ago expecting any of it to change. She did not say it for pity. She said it the way she'd say the weather, and then she asked him, steady as anything with her son at her breast and mud still in her hair, what she owed him for the night, and whether he meant to be paid in money or in trouble. Because she had learned the hard way that men did not generally do a thing for nothing. "You don't owe me a thing," Cole said, "and I'm not the kind of trouble you're thinking of." He was quiet a moment, looking off at the flats going gold in the new sun. "I've got a place. Small, south of Ridgely, away from Garrett's range. Nobody's run it proper since my mother passed. You and the boy can have the back room till you're fit to travel, and longer if you've a mind. There's work if you want to call it that, and no work if you don't." He still did not look at her. "I'd not put a woman and a day-old child back on that road. That's the whole of it." She studied him a long while. She had grown skilled, in the last year, at finding the hook in a man's kindness, and she turned this one over looking for it, and could not find the catch. "Hannah Reese," she said finally, holding out a mud-caked hand. "And this is Samuel, near as I can name him." "We'll take the room, Mr. Cole," he said, and took her hand, careful of her grip the way he'd be careful of anything that had just done something that hard. Cole Bannister. The place was small, and it was run down in the way of a man's place that had lost the woman who made it more than a place to sleep. Not from laziness, but from grief. The fences gray. The garden gone to seed. The kitchen sitting cold and unused since the last hands that had cared about it went still. Cole slept in the barn and gave her the house without a word about it, and for a week he asked nothing of her but that she mend and rest. And he did the cooking himself, which is to say he burned beans in a black pot, and they both pretended it was supper. It was Hannah who could not stand the kitchen one day longer. On the 8th day, with Samuel sleeping in a drawer she'd lined with Cole's spare blanket, she rose from the bed she was meant to be resting in and surveyed that cold kitchen the way a general surveys ground, and she rolled up her sleeves, and she began. She found the flour and the lard and the little he had, and out of nearly nothing she made bread and a pot of beans done right, with the salt pork rendered slow, and an onion and a long patience the cowboy's cooking had never once shown. The smell of it filled the small house and went out across the yard, and Cole Bannister came in from the fence line following his nose like a boy, and he stopped in the doorway, and he looked at the table set with hot bread and a proper supper and his mother's kitchen warm again for the first time in 3 years, and the man's throat worked, and he said nothing at all. He ate 2 helpings. He had not, she realized watching him, eaten anything made with care in a very long time. When he was done he sat at the table longer than he needed to, and she let him, and neither of them remarked on it. The boy grew. That was its own kind of healing in that house, a small, loud life where there had been only a man and his silence. And it was Samuel who reached the cowboy first, the way the framework of these things always runs, the child before the man. By the 3rd week, the boy would not settle of an evening for anyone but Cole, and Cole would walk him slow up and down the porch in the cool of the night. This hard, quiet man with a day laborer's hands holding an infant against his shoulder with a tenderness he'd have died before showing a grown soul. And Hannah would watch from the window and not let him know she watched. The child had chosen. She had learned to trust a child's choosing more than a grown person's words. The child was the proof. The man, when he came, would only be the confirmation. He showed his care the way such men do, sideways and silent. The garden she'd started came up watered every morning, though she'd not asked it. The drawer Samuel slept in became, one day without announcement, a proper cradle Cole had sat up 2 nights making in the barn. The backroom door that had hung crooked sat suddenly true, the latch catching clean, and when she thanked him, he only allowed that it had bothered him, and went away. There was a night, in the 3rd week, when the fever came for Samuel. It came the way the bad things always do, after dark, and the boy went hot and limp and quiet, and the quiet frightened Hannah worse than any crying could have. She sat up with him, and without being asked, Cole sat up too, the two of them on either side of the lamp, and she cooled the child, and he kept the fire and the broth warm. And somewhere in the black middle of that night, with the boy's breath shallow and the rain starting up again soft against the roof, the cowboy spoke. He told her about his mother, who had kept that kitchen, and how she had died of a fever not unlike this one, with him a half-day's ride away buying cattle, and how he had come home to a cold stove and never lit it again until Hannah lit it. He had not said this much at one time in 3 years. He said it to the lamp and not to her, the way a man tells a thing he has carried too long alone. Hannah did not comfort him with words. She reached across the lamp and put her hand over his rough one on the table, and she left it there, and that was all, and it was enough. By the gray hour the fever broke. Samuel woke hungry and squalling, which is the sweetest sound a frightened mother knows, and Cole Bannister turned his face to the window so she would not see what was on it. She saw it anyway. She said nothing about it then or after. She earned her keep in that house and a good deal more, though she announced none of it. She was there to mend and to rest, by his telling, but she noticed the gelding that had carried her through the storm had gone lame, and found the stone wedged in its frog that Cole had missed, and saved the animal weeks of limping. She noticed the well that fed the house ran bitter of an afternoon, and traced it to a dead thing fallen down the shaft, and had it cleaned before the boy could sicken from it. She noticed the small ledger where Cole kept his accounts in a cramped and hopeful hand, and saw that the Ridgely feed store had been charging him a married man's credit rate while delivering a bachelor's short measure, and she laid the figures out plain on the table for him to see. She did none of it for thanks, and called none of it remarkable. She simply did what she saw wanted doing, the way she always had, for a household that had forgotten such doing was even possible. Garrett came down the road in the 4th week. He did not come alone. Men like Garrett never do, but he came in a good buggy with the bank's man beside him and 2 of his riders behind, and he had a sheaf of papers and the patient confidence of a man who had bought every outcome he had ever wanted. He had found out, in the way such men find out everything, that the Reese widow and her brat were sheltering at the Bannister place, and he had come to finish the matter he'd started. He sat in the buggy in Cole's yard and laid it out friendly as Sunday, that the debt against the Reese land stood, that the land was forfeit, that the woman had no claim and no husband and no friends with the standing to say otherwise, and that he was, out of Christian feeling, prepared to let her keep a few dollars if she signed the last paper now and stopped wasting everyone's time. He looked at Cole when he said the part about friends with standing. He had measured the cowboy and found him small. A 1-horse outfit south of town. No money, no name worth the fearing. It was the same mistake men like Garrett always made, and it was the last one he made in that county. What Garrett did not know, because he had never once troubled to learn anything about the people he stepped over, was that Hannah Reese had not spent her weeks of mending only mending. She had her late husband's papers in the bottom of the trunk she'd thrown in the wagon, every receipt and deed and letter. And among them, she had found it on the 3rd night, by lamplight, while the men slept, was the original survey and the bank's own first mortgage release, paid in full and stamped, dated 2 months before the debt Garrett now claimed had supposedly been signed. The paper Garrett held was a forgery built on a debt already cleared. and she could prove the clearing in her dead husband's true hand against the forgery in his false one. She had not known whether a Texas court would hear a widow over a cattle baron. But she had written in her steady hand to the federal land office in Austin, where Garrett's local law did not reach, and enclosed copies, and sent it by a freighter Cole trusted, who did not pass through Ridgely. She had told no one but Cole, and Cole she had told only so that if anything happened to her on that road, the truth would not die with her. That was the thing about Hannah Reese. She did not wait to be rescued when there was anything left she could still try herself. The answer from Austin had come back 2 days before Garrett's buggy. It named the cattleman. It voided his claim, and it carried the signature of a federal land commissioner who had taken a sudden and dangerous interest in how titles changed hands in Ridgely. But that reckoning came later, and it came in town. And that is the part Ridgely never forgot. The day Garrett sat in his buggy in the yard, Cole Bannister only stood up off the porch step and told the man, in the few words he had, to take his paper off his land before the words ran out, and something less polite took their place. Garrett went, smiling, certain he'd be back with the sheriff. And he was, 3 weeks on, with the law and a wagon and the full pomp of an eviction, in the public square of Ridgely, where he meant to make of the widow's ruin a lesson to anyone else who might tell him no. He had not counted on the cowboy riding in first with the letter from Austin. It happened in the open, in front of the whole town, the mercantile crowd, the church women, the men who had spent a year calling Hannah Reese names on that very square. Cole Bannister had used words sparingly his whole life. But there, in front of every soul in Ridgely who had ever looked at her sideways, he handed the federal commissioner's letter to the circuit judge who'd come down for the eviction, and he said his piece. Plain, this man forged a debt against a dead man and tried to take a widow's land and her child's birthright while she was burying her husband. His voice did not rise and did not need to. The land office in Austin says the debt's a lie and the title's hers, free and clear, and stamped by a man Garrett can't buy. She proved it. She did it herself, with her husband's own papers, while this man was sending riders to foul her well. He looked out at the crowd then, at the faces that had spent her down to nothing. There's not a person on this square did one thing to help her. She birthed her boy alone in a storm, because not one of you would have taken her in, so you'll not stand here now and watch this man finish what your turned back started. The square went silent. Then it did the thing that gave the story its long life in that county. The judge read the letter and voided Garrett's claim on the spot and ordered the cattleman bound over for the forgery, and his hired men melted back into the crowd that no longer wanted to be seen beside him, and the people of Ridgely, the church women who had crossed the street from her, the storekeeper's wife who had named her in the open, the men who had laughed, stood in that square and understood all at once what they had failed to do, and what this woman had survived because of it, and what it had cost a near stranger to do what a whole town would not. The shame of it broke over them all together. Grown men took off their hats. The church women wept openly, some from gladness and some from the harder thing, and there was hardly a dry face on the square by the time the judge stepped down, because a town will sometimes weep hardest at the exact moment it sees itself clearly. Garrett was led away to answer in a court he had not paid for. Some men get away clean in this world, and some are made to answer at last, and the cattle baron of Ridgely was, against every expectation he had ever held, the second kind. When it was over, in the quiet of the wagon ride home with Samuel asleep against her, Hannah looked at the man beside her. "You let them think you did it," she said. "It was my husband's papers. My letter to Austin." "I made a speech," Cole said. "You won the case. Town will only remember the speech." A pause, and the corner of his mouth moved, which on Cole Bannister was the same as another man laughing out loud. Let him remember it. I'll know better. She did not go on to her sister's county. The road that had nearly killed her had carried her, by some accounting she would never fully understand, to the one place that did not measure her and find her wanting. They were married that autumn in the small church at Ridgely, and the town that had wept on the square came to the wedding, quieter now and gentler, having learned the lesson the hard way that towns mostly do. She walked up the aisle with her chin level and her eyes forward, with Samuel on her hip, because she would not be parted from him even for that. And no voice in those pews said one unkind word, then or ever after. The Bannister place came back the way the garden did, by patient seasons. The fences went gray no longer. The kitchen stayed warm. Cole adopted the boy in the eyes of the law before the year was out, and Samuel grew up calling him the only father he would ever know, and learned to ride before he could rightly walk, and there was bread rising in that house every morning, and smoke from the chimney, and a man who'd relearned that some things are worth the cost of saying them out loud. In the spring of 1898, Samuel Bannister married a girl from the next county under the cottonwood his father had planted the year he was born. And his mother stood at the front of the gathering with her chin level and her gray hair pinned up. And there was bread enough on the long tables for everyone in Ridgely. And they all came. And they were glad. Hannah Reese had been left alone in a storm to bring a child into the world in the mud, by a town that would not open a single door to her, and a man who meant to take everything she had left. She had been found by a stranger who did the one thing nobody else would, and then she had saved herself and her son besides, with her dead husband's true hand and her own steady ink, against a man the whole county feared. She did not need anyone's permission to take up room in the world, nor to keep what was hers, nor to be worth a stranger riding into a storm for. She had stopped asking permission somewhere out on those drowned flats, with her newborn screaming his first breath into the clearing sky. She took up every inch of the life she had earned, with both hands, her whole self, and she stayed.